James turned much too easily. The wind puffed him round like a top. He couldn't stop.
Tinders and Turntables. Not one of my favorite episodes when I was a kid, but still an iconic one nonetheless. It's not that there's anything wrong with this episode. I'd just be a liar if I said it was one of those ones that really stood out to me when I was a kid. Well, other than for the reason that, you've probably seen the episode, you know the reason. But on the chance you haven't seen this episode, let me give you a quick rundown. The big engines, being Henry, Gordon, and James, are finding themselves tired and what they would call overworked. With Thomas and Edward now being busy on a branch line, they're now forced to get their coaches and freight cars themselves, something that the big engines claim is beneath them. To accommodate the big engines, being Tinder engines, Sir Topham Hatt would end up building 2 turntables on either side of the line so that they could be turned around with relative ease. However, the engines have to be balanced on the turntable just right for it to perform properly. And one day, Gordon claiming that he's more important than Thomas for having a Tinder, Gordon would arrive at one of these turntables and, still upset from earlier and not really caring about what he's doing, would give his crew and the turntable operators a little bit of trouble in getting him into place. Gordon's lack of effort and the combination of the high winds that day leave the workmen basically unable to turn him around, and as a result Gordon has to pull the express backwards, something that Thomas and everybody jokes about, calling him a tank engine. James would pass by and see this and make fun of Gordon even more, leading him to feel quite prideful and Gordon to feel more indignant. James would then go back to the turntable to get into the sheds, coincidentally at the same time that Gordon would come back. Again, all James originally wanted to do was get turned around. However, much to his horror and Gordon's amusement, the wind would start to pick up and James would start basically doing a spinjitzu. The turntable would spin him quite unforgivably, so much so that it visibly makes him sick, leaving Gordon the chance to crack a joke back at James, and now leaving James more than feeling indignant, to say the least. That night the engines would confide with each other, each one agreeing that the treatment that they had been receiving was unjust, claiming that Tinder engines shouldn't have the responsibilities that they do. The 3 then planned to go on strike. While not being a really in-depth story, it is one of those stories that's a classic from the Reverend W. Awdry, so it does have some real-life basis behind it. While I wasn't able to find as much as I would normally like, I was still able to locate quite a bit of substantial inspiration that the Reverend W. could have taken in writing this story. With all of that being said, let's take a look at the possible real story of Tinders and Turntables. While it wasn't common for engines to go on strike, at a time it was fairly common for the drivers to, and that was around the 1950s. It was also fairly common for an engine to either stick a turntable or fall into it. However, the element of the story is an engine getting spun on a turntable, and this would be inspired by an event that would take place at the now Garsdale Junction. The wording of the original incident report is as follows. December 21st, 1900, from the Settle Inspector of Mr. Silcock. As the pilot engine number 1310 was turning on the turntable this morning, the wind being so strong caused the engine to get beyond control. It's unclear how long the engine will be spinning for and if the crew was inside of it. Apparently sandbags were used to stop the turntable spinning, and as a result of this incident it will be stockaded with a wall of sleepers, as this would happen to at least one other turntable on the Highland Railway. What you're looking at now is a 242T locomotive, specifically LMS number 10899, and this is actually sitting on the famous Garsdale turntable. The new added sleepers would now protect engines from the strong winds. The turntable this actually happened on still survives to today, and now turns locomotives at the Kaleen-Worth Valley Railway. Now if only we could get a Day Out with Thomas event where they would take a James locomotive and just spin it uncontrollably on it, I'd be down for that shit. I know you all will be too. I've done my best to look around, but I haven't been able to find a picture of the actual pilot engine, number 1310, the one that was supposedly spun around on the turntable in the fashion that James was. However, the Midland Railway Class 115s were referenced several times in my efforts to actually find a picture of that locomotive. It's not exactly James's class, but if this were to be one of the engines that did it, I could see it looking close enough, at least enough for Reverend W to make a story out of it. Just like I said before, Tinders and Turntables wasn't necessarily a favorite to me when I was a kid, but having the ability to rewatch it and now appreciate it a little bit more with the knowledge that I have, I find the pettiness of the big engines and just their overall attitude to the situation honestly funny and a lot more accurate. I wish this was something that they actually maintained in current Thomas. However, besides that, you have to again give points to the Reverend W for being able to take such an event and make it into such an iconic episode and story. If there's any classic Thomas and Friends episode that I would argue shows the real attitude that Gordon once had, it would definitely be this one, and it's not just him. The superior superiority complex of all the big engines really shows in this episode. And James getting spun like he's a fucking Beyblade? You can't tell me that's not iconic. And just like I always am, I find myself impressed with the Reverend W for being able to take such a seemingly basic story and do so much more with it. Tinders and Turntables is once again one of those episodes that's no exception. Thank you again to everybody who voted in the last poll, letting me know that I should do this for my next true story. It came down to this one or Percy Runs Away, so expect that one for the next one. I was able to find quite a bit of information that could have inspired that story, so if you voted in favor of that episode, no worries, it is coming. If there's any other stories you guys think I should check out, be sure to let me know down in the comments. And once again, hopefully you guys like taking a look at the true story of Tinders and Turntables with me. Thanks again for watching.